Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 10 tight end rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're talking about all things related to the tight end position, starting off with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing tight ends thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. That's correct. All of our rankings throughout the week are for a half PPR scoring format, meeting everyone in the middle who plays full PPR or standard. Of course, after we talk about matchups, we'll talk about my top 16 tight end rankings on the week. For those who are interested in staying up to date on my latest content and rankings and extra content outside of the channel itself, you can go down below in the description of the video and find my Patreon. While you're down there, you can also find timestamps to find a specific player you're looking for if you don't want to wait throughout the entirety of the video. And outside of that, for those of you who are down there and have not yet subscribed already to the channel, join the community. We are on our way to 34,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough for the incredible support this season. Again, you guys have just been awesome to me, and make sure you click the like button down below, leave a comment, helping out the algorithm and making sure the channel's going in the right direction. So I really do appreciate it. Outside of that, the Discord link is also in the first line of the description for those of you who are looking to find a community server in which we can all talk about fantasy football. We're definitely doing that over there. All right. So now that we've covered that, we can go ahead and move on, and let's right away start talking about matchups at the tight end position, beginning with the easiest matchups for this upcoming week, or as I like to say, the most advantageous matchups. I know a lot of you poke fun at that in the comments section, but either way, the Atlanta Falcons unfortunately will not be able to be taken advantage of as they are on a bye week, along with the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Jets, and the Kansas City Chiefs. So again, there's we're not going to have Kelsey this week, but maybe some of you want to start him anyway because he might put up just as many points as some of these other guys because the tight end position is such an inconsistent group. Regardless, I'm just joking. Let's start talking about some of the better matchups. Of course, the Cincinnati Bengals giving up the second most points to opposing tight ends this season. Eric Ebron has the privilege of taking advantage of that. They're nearly giving up a touchdown per game to opposing tight ends, and opposing offenses are targeting the tight end position against the Bengals nearly 9 times a game. So there's obviously an advantage there, and something that we have to look at for those of you who potentially picked up Eric Ebron coming off of back-to-back good weeks of fantasy production. You could find yourself playing him and potentially getting a touchdown. Outside of that, of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars giving up a lot of points. That's great for Robert Tonyan, of course, if they want to go ahead and utilize him more and more in the offense. Just depends how the game script goes and how exactly their game plan has been set up for this upcoming week. There are other tight ends. There's still Jay Sternberger and there's Mercedes Lewis that are stealing not only touches, but touchdowns throughout the week. So that's always tough for a guy like Tonyan. Moving on to Philadelphia Eagles, of course, giving up a lot of points this season. They've given up a lot of touchdowns. They're amongst one of those teams that just every single week they're getting scored on. But Evan Engram just played them a couple weeks back, had a pretty good game, and he's getting consistent targets, should be able to take care of that matchup. The Buffalo Bills, they themselves not really, there's not really a tight end on the Arizona Cardinals taking advantage of that. The Washington football team, they'll have the privilege of taking on TJ Hockenson, who is really becoming one of the better tight ends in the National Football League in terms of fantasy production. And of course, for his own team, being one of the top targets there as Kenny Golladay has gone down over the last couple weeks. Again, the New Orleans Saints giving up a lot of points, and the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, these are defenses that are in this conversation every single week. They've kind of lowered as the weeks have progressed, and they haven't faced as many great tight ends, but they are still giving up a fair share of points to opposing tight ends and a fair share of touchdowns, which is always something that we are looking to try to get on a weekly basis in order to secure our tight ends week to make sure that they have some sort of stable production there. But either way, just giving you some perspective as to which tight ends got great matchups this week. In terms of the tougher matchups, of course, you don't really want to play tight ends up against the Indianapolis Colts, the New England Patriots, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Those 3 teams have been nightmares for opposing tight ends. Mark Andrews this week, Jonnu Smith this week, and of course, Drew Sample we're not really taking advantage of, but those 2 tight ends in specific, Mark Andrews, Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith has, he's been on a little bit of a slide. I know he scored last week, but he only had 2 targets, 2 receptions, and Mark Andrews has been on a horrible slide. I think he's probably close to falling out of the top 12 tight ends as of thus far this season because, again, it's really difficult for specifically tight ends to score on Bill Belichick, but that offense hasn't looked as good as they have in the past. And a couple receptions here and there, unless he catches a touchdown, doesn't really make a week for a tight end on your roster. So anyway, we've gotten a little bit of perspective there. Look at that. The Indianapolis Colts have not given up a single receiving touchdown to opposing tight ends this year. Just kind of giving you a little perspective there. All right, now that we've covered that, we can go ahead and start talking about my top 16 tight end rankings on the week. Let's get into it with our number 1, of course, Darren Waller. Because Travis Kelce is out this week, Darren Waller takes the helm as the number 1 tight end of the week. So as of right now, Darren Waller is the number 2 tight end in fantasy in a half PPR scoring format. He's getting consistent targets, production, and scoring. He's already scored more touchdowns than he did all of last season. As of just this past week, he had himself against Los Angeles Chargers 10 total targets, 5 receptions, only 22 receiving yards, but scored a touchdown. Again, those 10 targets are always going to lead to his success. Now, the thing that I thought was a huge surprise when I saw it, as of right now, Darren Waller has 72 total targets. If, in fact, he continues this pace for the next 8 games of this season, he's going to have over 140 targets, which will probably be almost 30 plus from last season. Now, as of right now, he already has 50 receptions, so he's on pace to break his receptions count from last season, which was 90. He already has 4 touchdowns, on his pace to get potentially 8. His yardage count might not get up to 1,100 like last year, but my goodness, he's been fantastic. Playing against the Denver Broncos, in my opinion, again, the Denver Broncos defense, their coverage has not been the best this season. And as long as Darren Waller is being utilized the way he has been, whether it's outside, in the slot position, lined up next to a left tackle or right tackle, even out of the backfield, they've used him all around the field. He is their number 1 threat in terms of the passing game, and he's always been that as of the last 2 seasons. So as of right now, I'm very confident in Darren Waller. He's my number 1 tight end. Moving on to TJ Hockenson. TJ Hockenson is only 1.4 points behind Darren Waller for the number 2 tight end spot this season in a half-point PPR scoring format. TJ Hockenson has been nothing but incredible this season, averaging 10.6 fantasy points per game throughout the first 8 games of the season for this team. Just this past week, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 39 yards, and a receiving touchdown for 12.4 fantasy points. This kind of productivity, whether it's a touchdown accompanied with the yardage or just receptions and yards, he is consistently getting over that 9 to 10 point mark, which we can't ask for more of. I mean, TJ Hockenson has not only been a surprise as to how efficient he's been in comparison to how he was utilized last year. I know he dealt with a lot of injuries last year, but my goodness, he's been fantastic. The Washington football team giving up the 6th most points to opposing tight ends just seems like a fantastic matchup for him with Matthew Stafford under center. Should be a fantastic play and an automatic one at this point. Evan Engram is my number 3. So Evan Engram in the last 3 weeks has kind of turned over a new leaf, and finally Jason Garrett is getting him more and more involved, and Daniel Jones is more and more looking in his direction to get him more utilization and usage in this offense. So the question is going to be, can Evan Engram sustain his target counts over the last 3 weeks? He's had 29 total targets. The last time that he played against the Philadelphia Eagles, had a 9-target game, 61 receiving yards, could have caught the game-winning pass to pretty much ice the game, would have had himself nearly 7 catches for 85 yards if in fact he made that play. Fortunately was not able to, but this time around he's coming off of 2 back-to-back weeks of playing very well. Just this past week, 10 targets, 5 receptions, 48 receiving yards, and a touchdown. I think he's got a pretty good opportunity this upcoming week against Philadelphia, who's giving up the 4th most points to opposing tight ends. Again, they've given up their fair share of touchdowns on a weekly basis to opposing tight ends, and I think this is a fantastic week for Evan Engram. We have ourselves Dallas Goedert as our number 4 in this same matchup on the other side of the field. As Evan Engram takes on the Eagles will take on, and Dallas Goedert will take on the New York Giants defense. Now, I know the Giants defense, in terms of giving up points to opposing tight ends, has been pretty good this season. They've got a good linebacking core over there, and they've honestly been able to cover pretty well. The last time that Richard Rodgers played against this defense, back in week 7 for the Philadelphia Eagles, he had himself a really good game. 8 targets, 6 catches for 85 yards. But that isn't the only great performance against the New York Giants defense as of the last 4 weeks. As of the last 4 weeks, we've seen pretty good production and pretty good performances against that defense from the tight end position. Of course, like we mentioned, Richard Rodgers playing against them, putting up 11.5 fantasy points. We saw Logan Thomas put up himself 11.7 points, scoring a touchdown against the New York Giants defense. And of course, a couple weeks back, Rob Gronkowski scoring a touchdown against them for 12.1 fantasy points. So again, there's always an opportunity for Dallas Goedert now that he's not only come back from the injury, had a bye week to then fully get himself prepared for this game, should be in line for a lot of targets. Let's not forget, in the first 2 weeks of the season, when Dallas Goedert was fully healthy, even with Zach Ertz in the lineup, he had himself 17 targets in 2 weeks. That could be in line for this upcoming week. I'm excited about his potential going forward. Noah Fant. If Noah Fant is healthy, I think his utilization in this offense, and obviously the comfort with Drew Lock and him, has been something that has been pretty notable in the last couple of weeks. Of course, he started off the game against the Atlanta Falcons last week with 3 catches for 45 yards right out the gate, starting off hot in the first quarter, then left with an ankle injury. If in fact Noah Fant is fully ready to go, I haven't really read a report that says that he is not going to play this week. I'd 100% be on board to start him and potentially get a pretty good performance out of him. Why? Because Albert Okwuegbunam, the second string tight end they just drafted, the rookie, who was former teammates with Drew Lock in college, he has torn his ACL. He is out for the season. So there isn't that much more competition for Noah Fant at the position, and there's not going to be targets being taken away from him. I think Noah Fant, if healthy, if ready to go, is always going to see upwards of 7 to 8, maybe even double-digit targets on a weekly basis, considering his utilization in this offense and the Pat Shurmur scheme of always using tight ends. So I think Noah Fant, as my number 5 this week, if healthy and ready to go, should be a great option. Austin Hooper coming off an injury himself. Here's the thing. Austin Hooper, prior to leaving and missing those 2 weeks, or at least 3 weeks, so he's had a pretty good amount of time to rest and recover. So the question is going to be, what did he do prior to his injury, and what can he potentially see going forward? Prior to his injury, he had 23 targets in 3 games. That's upwards of 7 targets per game, which is a great number to see. Of course, that kind of opportunity at the tight end position could definitely lead to success. It definitely led to touchdowns, and even when it didn't lead to a touchdown, it led to high yardage counts and receptions that definitely helped in a half PPR scoring format. Now, while he's been absent in the 2 games that he has been, of course, Harrison Bryant and David Njoku, they themselves stepped up in one singular game. Both those guys had a combined 3 total touchdowns against the Cincinnati Bengals defense, giving up a lot of points to opposing tight ends. But another thing is that they had 14 targets in the 2 weeks combined that Austin Hooper was gone. So those 7 targets per game to tight ends is still there. I think when Austin Hooper returns, he is going to see that playing against the Houston Texans this week, giving up the 10th most points to opposing tight ends. Just seems like a match made in heaven. I think, of course, Baker Mayfield's going to be playing this week and should be a great option with Austin Hooper. Moving on to our number 7, we have ourselves Robert Gronkowski. So here's the thing about Rob. I mean, he's been playing great. Of course, he was coming off of 3 consecutive weeks of a touchdown this past week against the New Orleans Saints. The offense pretty much fell apart, but I'm not too concerned about it, and I'm not going to hold it against him because, again, he has had 26 targets in the last 4 weeks. That in itself is an incredible number considering the offense that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have constructed. They have so many weapons with Mike Evans, now Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin coming back from injury. You have Leonard Fournette catching the ball out of the backfield. You still have Cameron Brate there and Ronald Jones. There are so many threats in this offense that the fact that Rob Gronkowski is still pulling in upwards of 6 targets per game just speaks to the amount of volume that they are going to continuously send in his direction and the amount of opportunity that he has to act upon in order to be a relevant tight end. Therefore, that is why I have him at my number 7 spot. I think, yes, the Carolina Panthers matchup may not be the best, but he can definitely take advantage of it down in the red zone as a definite threat to catch a touchdown every single week with Tom Brady. So again, we throw him at number 7. I have a lot of hope that he has the potential for high upside every single week, and that is why he sits in this position. We move on to our number 8. We have ourselves, of course, Eric Ebron. We mentioned him earlier. He has the second best matchup of the week, playing against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals in the last 4 games have given up 7 touchdowns to opposing tight ends. That number in itself should pretty much give you the confidence of starting Eric Ebron. Besides the fact that he's been scoring touchdowns as of late, as of the last 4 weeks of the season, he's getting more and more utilization in this offense. And of course, the target counts are not always going to be the greatest considering the amount of other weapons when you have a Claypool and Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster, almost all of them pulling in 10 plus targets every week. Of course, the utilization of Eric Ebron is not going to be there, but down in the red zone is where he gets his work. That's where the Indianapolis Colts made him an all-pro. So again, there's always a possibility that we could see Eric Ebron get back into that, just like we did last week against the Dallas Cowboys, in which he catches the ball, scores a touchdown in the red zone against a defense that, of course, is giving up a lot of points and touchdowns to the tight end position. Gerald Everett's my number 9, and a lot of people may be thinking, okay, Gerald Everett's typically not in this conversation, Andrew, because Tyler Higbee was all this noise in the offseason because of what he did at the back end of the 2019 season. But to be honest, Gerald Everett has kind of caught my eye over the last couple weeks. The fact that he's gotten 14 targets in the past 2 games for the Los Angeles Rams is a very exciting prospect. And the fact that they take on the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle Seahawks, of course, they don't give up a lot of points to opposing tight ends, but opposing wide receivers end up feasting. And the way that they've used Gerald Everett in the past, they can slide him out to the slot position and utilize him there. I kind of, when I was thinking about these rankings, I thought to myself, all right, I've seen Gerald Everett produce against the Seattle Seahawks. It wasn't long ago. It was just back in 2019 where he had 11 targets, 7 receptions for 136 receiving yards against the Seattle Seahawks. So I think to myself, well, Sean McVay probably wants to go back to that well. He wants to probably continue to utilize Gerald Everett at that position and get him more opportunities to take advantage of this defense that maybe they can find a hole in. Again, they are, getting healthier as a defense. The Seattle Seahawks getting Jamal Adams back. Of course, they just added Carlos Dunlap last week as a defensive end. That team is getting better and better defensively, but I still think that they've got a lot of holes and a lot of problems in terms of covering. And I think Gerald Everett could be able to expose that this upcoming week. And that is why I have him as my number 9 this week. We have number 10, Jimmy Graham. Okay, so Jimmy Graham, surprisingly, when I was looking at stats earlier to this video, he's in the top 7 tight ends for this season already. But when I look at his stats, he doesn't have like 10 points per game. He has a couple major performances because he scores a touchdown, just like last week. 6 catches on 6 targets, 55 yards and a touchdown for 14.5 points. That kind of unbalances things. But Jimmy Graham, though he hasn't been 100% consistent in this offense, I think, of course, the matchup this upcoming week against the Minnesota Vikings, a defense that has given up 2 receiving touchdowns to opposing wide receivers every single week this season, and the fact that in the last 3 games, the Minnesota Vikings have given up 14.2 fantasy points to opposing tight ends, is an unbelievable number. I think there is going to be an opportunity for Jimmy Graham not only to get utilization down in the red zone, but to at least march down the field of this team and give them more opportunities. The fact that they're giving up, 14.2, that's 6 catches, 55 yards and a touchdown to opposing tight ends in the last 3 games. So again, that kind of utilization and opportunity for a guy like Jimmy Graham, who is coming off of a pretty hot week, I think could be taken advantage of, and you could find some really good points out of him this week. Jonnu Smith's my number 11, and mainly because I know what Jonnu Smith's capable of. I know in the last 2 games that he played against Indianapolis last season, he did nothing, literally jack squat. But I still think that Jonnu Smith in this offense has got a lot of opportunity down the red zone. This team is going to have to move the ball, and they're going to have to score. And of course, if Jonnu Smith ends up finding himself open in the end zone or catches a ball on a drag route and goes 60 yards, these are things that he's always capable of, and he's shown to proven that he's capable of. Now, the question is, this defense for the Indianapolis Colts, they're fast. They've got linebackers that can go from sideline to sideline, and they can definitely cover a guy like Jonnu Smith. So where exactly does he find his advantages? It's going to have to be in the play action. Derrick Henry is going to have to dominate tonight on Thursday Night Football in order to see some sort of success from Jonnu Smith, because if in fact they're not running the ball efficiently enough, then they don't have to stack the box, they don't have to commit to the run, and Jonnu Smith's availability and opportunity is going to be limited. So again, we'll keep an eye on that. I think Jonnu Smith definitely has himself a good chance here, and that is why I have him at my number 11. Number 12 is Mark Andrews. Yeah, many of you were wondering where was I going to put him. The fact of the matter is, Mark Andrews unfortunately has one of the tougher matchups in the National Football League. Playing against Bill Belichick as a tight end is pretty much a death sentence in terms of fantasy value. Bill Belichick does not allow any points to tight ends, whether it's Kittle, Kelsey, Andrews, it doesn't matter. Even Andrews last year against Belichick had like 2 or 3 catches for 30 yards. That's not going to cut it this week, and that's not what I want to see. I want to see a guy that can put up 20 points, and that's what I drafted him to do, but he has not been consistent. For those of you who have Mark Andrews already, you have to bench him this week. I'm sorry. That is just the unfortunate reality, and you might have to bench him in a couple weeks against Pittsburgh, but hold tight. Weeks 13 through 16, his incredible schedule will come through. For those of you who are still looking for a tight end to pick up during the trade deadline, buy low on Mark Andrews. That is my suggestion, but as of right now this week, just can't play him. Number 13 is Jared Cook. Now, my only issue and or concern with Jared Cook is the amount of mouths that are being fed in that New Orleans Saints offense. It's kind of different to Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron, in my opinion, he's in an offense that has just as many threats, but what Drew Brees did last week with the fact that not only are they given the ball and allowing second and third string tight ends to score, but they have like Emmanuel Sanders, Traquan Smiths. They have, they still even have Taysom Hill running around scoring touchdowns. They have literally 9 different players that can score on any given play. And that in itself scares me. And there's a reason why Jared Cook only had 2 catches for 20, 30 yards last week. Unfortunately fumbled, which kind of, made his entire day irrelevant. But I think, again, unless he is going to score a touchdown, that's where his value has only been. He cannot get enough yardage. He has not been that guy for the last 2 years in the New Orleans Saints organization. He needs touchdowns. And unfortunately, this upcoming week in San Francisco, it's definitely going to be a tough task at hand. We have Robert Tonyan at my number 14. Again, I mentioned it earlier. Robert Tonyan has one of the better matchups. The Jacksonville Jaguars give up the 3rd most points to opposing tight ends. In fact, they've allowed 7 touchdowns to opposing tight ends just this season alone in their 8 games. So the question remains, what could we potentially see from Robert Tonyan? I think that, of course, he could score a touchdown. He could get good yardage. But with Jay Sternberger and Mercedes Lewis consistently getting usage and playing a lot, it makes it that much harder to trust in a guy like him. But as of right now, I think because of the matchup, there is a very good chance that you could see him catch the ball, 4 times, 30 yards and a touchdown, and make him, a pretty good 10-point week there. So there's always a possibility of that, and we'll just go ahead and leave it at that as my number 14. Number 15 is Irv Smith Jr. Now, I think right now, based on all of the receiving threats for the Minnesota Vikings, Irv Smith probably has the best matchup. The Chicago Bears have given up the 9th most points to opposing tight ends this season. On a consistent basis, they have gotten gashed by tight ends. I mean, it was just last week that we saw Jonnu Smith even score after having 3 consecutive weeks of being a nobody. So again, Chicago covering tight ends, that's definitely been a struggle for them. Irv Smith is probably coming off the best week of his career in which he scored 2 touchdowns on 2 catches for 10 yards. As long as he's getting utilization down in the red zone, that is a good sight to see, especially if in fact Dalvin Cook starts to stall out when they get down into the red zone and the Bears have their backs to the walls. Now, Dalvin Cook could easily run through this team for 200 plus yards, and we can never even see Irv Smith even catch a ball this week. But if in fact they stall out down in the red zone, there is always going to be an opportunity for Irv Smith as a tight end of this team, along with, of course, Kyle Rudolph, which makes it that much harder to trust. But as long as Irv Smith's getting more and more targets and more utilization, I have the ability to trust in him. Jordan Reed is the last tight end I want to talk about today. As of right now, I've mentioned this multiple times. Jordan Reed last week was coming off of a injured reserve designation, and I didn't think he would play that much. That's why I didn't rank him last week. I know a lot of you were asking, where's Jordan Reed? I didn't expect him to do well. That's why we talked about Ross Dwelley last week in Week 9's waiver wire pickups, and he did pretty well. So the question is, what can we anticipate from Jordan Reed against the New Orleans Saints, giving up the 7th most points to opposing tight ends this season? As of right now, based on the quarterback, based on getting a couple pieces back like a Brandon Ayuk and potentially Deebo Samuel this week, I am anticipating more and more utilization of course, Jordan Reed. Now, from what I remember from Nick Mullins back in the 2018 season with George Kittle, when Jimmy Garoppolo went down with the torn ACL, Nick Mullins gave so much value to George Kittle that he broke the record for the most receiving yards for a tight end in a single season. Not only that, he has the record for the 2nd most receiving yards in a single game by a tight end. Of course, Kyle Shanahan dropped the ball in the second half of that game, but regardless, the whole point is Jordan Reed is going to be utilized because, of course, Nick Mullins likes to target the tight end position. He did it last week with Dwelley. I think Jordan Reed gets more usage this week, and in a good matchup, in my opinion, has himself a good opportunity. So those are our top 16 quarterback rankings on the week. Thank you, everybody, for watching, spending your time here today. If you have not yet already subscribed to the channel, click the like button down below and help us out by commenting down below. Later this afternoon, we'll talk about the matchup, my prediction, and my quarterback ranking, so make sure you guys check that out. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Tomorrow, Hidden Gems. I'll see you guys. Peace.